President Cyril Ramaphosa is in his second term. Now, he leads the country at a time when there's a government of national unity. It's a critical time for South Africa. But also, a lot of people associate him with business, student leadership, anti-apartheid activism, a trade unionist. You can think of many titles, but today we want to talk to him, reflecting on South Africa's journey 30 years on. We are in a democratic South Africa. What are some of his reflections? Mr. President, thank you so much for your time.
You're most welcome. Most welcome.
When one goes to the State of the Nation website, you see the reflections of South Africa 30 years on, and government says, and I quote, in 1994, South Africa experienced a profound transformation from the injustices of apartheid to the promise of a democratic nation. Our journey over the past 30 years reflects the collective efforts of all South Africans to build a society rooted in freedom, equality, and dignity for all, close quote. I just want to know, what are your personal reflections of South Africa 30 years on?
My own reflections of the journey that we have traversed is that we have made a great deal of progress in the 30 years. Given that we started dealing with undoing the damage that was done to this country over a 340-year period. A period of colonialism, a period of apartheid, and a period of humiliation of the black majority in this country, who were humiliated by being dispossessed of their properties, thus being relegated. Once they were stripped of their property, they were then relegated to the poor levels of life, and who were humiliated because they were stripped of their rights. Some the rights to vote. Right at the beginning, black people used to have rights to vote, and we all lost those. But who were also humiliated because their human rights were just degraded, destroyed, up to and including people being sent to prison and life and death as well. Now the first one, and who were also humiliated by not being given the opportunities to sharpen their own skills, to learn, to be whatever they wanted to be in life, either tradespeople with skills and scientists or whatever. So all that amounted to the lack of opportunity for black people. So in 1994, when the new government came into place, after a struggle that was waged by the people of South Africa themselves, aided by many others around the world, but led by the various political organizations, the ANC, which I belong to, being at the head. Now, in 1994, we are then given a country that is destroyed in many, many ways, and the capability of a people who had also been destroyed. We then started in many ways to rebuild people's lives. We started rebuilding the economy, because the economy itself, much as those who were in power would think it was working well, it wasn't, because it was not working on all cylinders. It was working for a minority well, and it hadn't opened up all its capabilities by utilizing all the people in the country. So the journey then was to undo all that. And looking back 30 years later, I do believe that we have achieved a great deal in just 30 years, in one generation. I calculate a generation as 30 years. And apartheid and colonialism destroyed the livelihood of our people over many generations. So we have changed the trajectory of their country. Am I satisfied? No. I'm not satisfied with where we are right now, and I would characterize the description that I have as the glass being half full. But it's not half empty. Yeah. We still have a long way to go to undo the damage that was done deliberately by those who were running this country.
How much of undoing, though, would you say has been done?
Quite a lot of undoing has been done, and it can never be complete. When it comes, for instance, to education, which was what I would call the sharp end of the destruction of colonialism and apartheid, because that's where, in my view, the effect has been the sharpest and the worst. We've been able to bring back many, many children back to school. The school attendance has risen exponentially. Many children are now back at school. There aren't parents who today can say, I cannot send my child to school because I can't afford it. We now almost have 90% of our schools being no-fee paying schools. So to change that has been phenomenal. We feed 9 million children every day at school, and we are now moving to 2 meals a day. And that in itself is important because it improves the learning ability of children. When we started, we gave our young people, 40,000 of our young people, assistance to be at higher level of learning, tertiary. We now give that assistance to 1.2 children, young people, million, and spending a lot of money in doing that. And we have built more universities, and we are going to be building more universities. We're building more technical colleges. We're bringing children more and more into technical learning. We still have to do a lot to improve that quality of education, to improve the infrastructure in our schools. Much more still needs to be done, but we are on the journey to doing precisely that. When it comes, for instance, to restoring the asset possession of our people, we still have a long way to go in terms of land, but we've built 4 million houses, and which on a straight line, if you were just to do a calculation, and you said it's maybe worth, even if you say 80,000 rand each house or 100,000, it's 400 billion that has been given as assets to our people. We need to do much more. So on an ongoing basis, we're doing better. We've created a middle class. A black middle class did not exist. We've brought into existence a black middle class. We have enabled black people to move into the professions and to be active in those professions, in medical, in engineering. The numbers are going up. We still need to do much more to get black people into the management. We had 8 million people who were employed in South Africa in 1994. We now have 16 million people, meaning we've been able to create jobs and to grow the economy. This economy had never grown at levels of, say, 5%, ever. And during democracy, it has been able to reach that level, but has tapered down. So if you look across the spectrum, there are areas where we've done extremely well. There are areas where we still need to do more.
You talk about education, and one wonders, though, if 30 years on, we're still, every time we have to get our matric results, as a nation, we are told of children who started school but cannot finish.
Yes.
And those children cannot be tracked.
Yes.
we don't know where they are.
Yes.
One then wonders if these flaws in the system at some point, can they ever be fixed? Because they are speaking of young people who are not being skilled, who are not being tracked, who are not being provided for potentially, for the benefit of the country.
Along the way, in the 30-year period, we've made some mistakes. And there have been missteps. The one glaring one for me, which we only started correcting last year, was that we started focusing on education on slightly older children and did not pay attention to the much younger children. And it is only now that we are saying, we've said, and I've insisted that we should, because I've seen the effect, that the preschool sector needs to be brought into formal education. The preschool sector was just being loosely looked after by social development. And these are children who are just running around in our townships, in our towns, in our rural areas, and going into creches that have been started by our grandmothers and great-grandmothers without formalizing the way they should learn. Now we are saying children as early as 4 years must be brought into formal preschooling education. And paying attention to that is going to pay dividends for us. At a later stage, when they get into school, that is when we will be able to reduce the incidence of dropouts. Nearly every year, 1 million children start school. When they have to write matric, only 400,000 or so write. And I've often asked, where are the 500,000? And they have fallen through the cracks. And of course, some of them go into other disciplines of learning, which we can't track properly. But I'm saying we now must be like the hen, the hen that looks after all these chicks. It always knows when one is short.
Do you take Gogo Dlamini, though, on this journey? And I ask this because when you go to the townships, there's a Gogo, like you say,
yes,
who would have provided the creche, who would have provided some kind of security for a mother who was not able to afford proper daycare for
yes,
their kids.
yes.
And Gogo was able to make some kind of living,
yes,
and be able to keep the economy going on her own part,
yes,
in her small way. But now there's almost like an outcry from some who are saying the system seems to be shutting them out instead of taking them on board, because as much as they were taking the kids to say sleep, it's informal, it's all of that, but they wish they can get training as well, yes, in order to be able to have their livelihoods, because they feel like the system has just seemingly just taken them out of the equation altogether.
The program that we've inaugurated and we are firming up is alive to that reality and is geared towards addressing precisely that problem. We know, for instance, there are some 10 million young children, and only 1.7 million of them are in the more formalized early childhood system. And so we've got almost 8 million young children, 7 million something, who are just running around, and some of them are with Gogo Dlamini. And we want to empower Gogo, to put her through some training so that we formalize her own undertaking. And so that must then be brought into early childhood. That creche must be part of the early childhood system, where she will now know how, for instance, she becomes part of the whole cohort. She's trained, she's properly empowered, and she becomes a whole part of the whole chain. That's going to be costly for us because it's bringing in 8 million young people with their carers, with their teachers and all that. But that is an investment we have to make, because that investment is possibly the most valuable when we invest in early childhood, because then it will avoid the failures that we have 12 years, maybe 14 years later. So we are going to be taking care of Gogo Dlamini to be part of the whole system as well.
Perhaps a step back, right on that point, to just before South Africa achieves its democracy.
Yeah.
Difficult times, difficult moments, and you then are front and center of some of these developments.
Yeah.
I want to take you back to a very key moment in history, the release of Nelson Mandela from prison.
Yeah.
What was that like for you?
Officials, marshals of the National Reception Committee trying to get the people, and a salute from Mr. Nelson Mandela, his wife Winnie, greeting the people outside the fences of the Victor Verster prison.
Wow. The release of Nelson Mandela was like bringing about a sea change. Many of us felt that the moment that we had been struggling for, that many had gone to jail for, many had gone to exile for, and many had died for, had now arrived, because the moment was pregnant with dramatic change. And we knew, and I knew certainly, that South Africa would never be the same again. That change was in the air, and we felt it. It was the most magical moment. And somehow we knew that this was a moment that we couldn't miss. We needed to strike at that moment to bring about real change in the trajectory of the country. So I was one of those who was really excited, but politically focused on what needed to be done. Mm-hmm. And the good fortune for many of us is that we had great leadership by the leaders of the ANC who were guiding us through this process so that it just does not happen in a chaotic way, an unorganized way. And we were fortunate as a country to have a leader like Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, and many others, who somehow had been so well prepared by providence, if you like, so well prepared by the years they spent in prison, in exile, because those moments had like almost incubated them to think through the various contours of the developments that would unfold. And they were steady, they were focused. And even as they spoke out, you could hear that there was no recklessness. It was real, pearls falling off the mouths of people who knew how to take this country forward.
How would you describe your relationship with him?
I was very privileged, I would say, to have had the opportunity to sit at the floor near his seat and to learn from him on an ongoing basis. Having met him for the first time in prison, when he called the COSATU leadership to come and see him, I just started developing a very good bond with him, and I was fortunate to have that bond unbroken throughout. So it was a privilege. It was a learning moment for me.
And I suppose when some then look at your story with him, and you read a number of books, Ray Hartley, for example, writing about you, says that when his inauguration came, the reason why you were not there is because you felt sidelined. and others, have said all kinds of things. But I wonder, what is your account?
Well, people have said a whole number of things about having been sidelined, having not been
his chosen one. Some say you were his chosen one, but not the ANC's chosen one. So many descriptions of that moment. What do you say?
Yeah, no. I mean, there are so many descriptions, and people, infuse all manner of reasoning to this, and it's really difficult because he is not here to give his own account, because the conversations that I had with him about the decisions that he and others had taken are completely far removed from what people say, because it was not a question of saying, you are now being relegated to the back, or you no longer wanted, or whatever. It was a very clear decision that we would like you to play this role, and so to play this role to take this country forward. And for me, as a disciplined member of the ANC, it was so. And I should also say
so there was no bitterness?
No, there was no bitterness on my part. Let me say, when, for instance, the government was formed, Madiba wanted me to be in government. I used to call him Data. I said, no, Data. I would like to remain in the ANC as Secretary General. Because when I was elected, I told him, I was elected because people had this sense, and which I believe was true, that having built the National Union of Mine Workers to be what it is then, I had a good ability of being an organizer. And I said, I would like to spend time to do that. Because no sooner had I been elected as Secretary General of the ANC than I was thrust into negotiations. So I said to him, I haven't really spent time building organization. Can you allow me to be out of government so that I can help build organization? He gave in to that. And then when the time for establishing the Constitutional Assembly came, he came back to me and he said, you cannot refuse me now. I want you to be chair of the Constitutional Assembly. And I had run out of excuses because I couldn't see myself refusing Madiba twice. And I said, okay, Tata, I will do it. So I then agreed to be chair of the Constitutional Assembly, which was a continuum of what I had been doing as Secretary General, leading the Negotiations Commission of the ANC.
And speaking about the negotiations, what was that moment like when you get there, you are seated at the table, and it's across people that would have been political enemies before, and now you must negotiate a settlement for South Africa? Just that moment, what did it feel like?
Well, for me, I felt hugely empowered. Empowered in the sense that, having spoken at length to Madiba and Comrade Walter Sisulu, and even OR, having asked them, and these I asked them personally, I said, don't you feel bitter that these people put you in jail? And I said to Comrade O, don't you feel bitter they kept you in exile? And all three of them separately, to me, said, no, we have no bitterness. We are here to build a country, and we put aside personal feelings, because those personal feelings will not help us as South Africans to take this country forward. So we focus on what needs to be done and be very political. That in many ways empowered me, even as I was interfacing with these people who had also put me in jail, in detention. I felt that I should put personal feelings aside, focus on the political objectives of my movement and the overall desires of the people of South Africa. Empowered also because I was literally backed up by the giants of our movement who were so wise, who were so clear in what needed to be done. And you know that you are backed up by a better force, you go forward and you feel so confident.
So be that as it may, right, because you're saying that they didn't want to take personal feelings, but I'm sure you are aware of the public discourse. There's a lot of personal feelings about what took place there. Mm-hmm. There are people who say that you should never have gone into negotiations with the enemy. Mm-hmm. You did not need to do that because you were never going to win. Mm-hmm. And you needed to be able to just take the country. If it means by force, it should be. Mm-hmm. What do you say to someone who still holds that view?
Well, it's a great view to hold. It's a very ambitious one and a bold one. I guess many of us who got into the struggle felt that way. I was a young student at the university, and when we marched on the police station to go and demand the release of one of our leaders, that's how we felt. We were walking on air. We thought the moment had come. We could take on the police, and we discounted the fact that they were armed with big guns. And it was, I guess, our wish, our ideal, that we should wage a struggle and in the end march into Pretoria with our guns blazing and take over the union buildings where I now work. But the reality of the situation is that it was not possible. But the other reality is they, the enemy, if you can call them, had also realized that much as they were hugely armed, it was impossible for them to defeat the people of South Africa. And on our side, we also knew what the reality was, that we could wage the war, we could unleash what we would call in the ANC the capability of the four pillars of our struggle, which was the armed struggle, the underground, international pressure, as well as the force and power of our people. And we had been doing that. And if you like, we had been in struggle for 82 years, since 1912. And we hadn't defeated them. And they had not defeated us. So when you reach a stalemate like that, you then have to opt for another answer. And it was Nelson Mandela who started talking like that to them in prison and said to them, look, you've been trying to destroy us and put us here in prison for life. You have not destroyed us. And we've also been trying, we haven't. The only option is for us to talk. And that is what then opened the way. Those who say we should have fought it to the end, yes, much as it may sound very exciting, don't know the full reality of the forces that were arrayed against us, and don't know the full reality of our own weaknesses in doing that, and don't know the full reality of what they were capable of or incapable of. So what brought us to the table in the end is a desire to find another way to solve our problems.
Was that the reason why in '92 when the Boipatong massacre happened. Yes, there were strong statements from yourself, strong statements from Nelson Mandela and every other leader at the time. But was that the reason why you decided then to say, regardless of what is happening, you're going to keep communication open with Rolf Meyer? And I'm keen to ask you then, if you didn't, what would have happened?
The leadership of the ANC, COSATU, the South African Communist Party, the Women's League, the Youth League and the civic organizations have been here for just over 3 hours. And in these 3 hours, we've been hearing statements about police involvement in the massacre that took place here. A massacre that we regard as a national tragedy. It is becoming clear now that the government's agenda, in as far as the violence question is concerned, is to ensure that they negotiate with an ANC which is completely powerless, which hasn't got a following because of the violence that is being unleashed against its members. And no doubt, actions like these, where many of our people are being killed, could very well lead to the negotiation process being derailed and being destabilized. And I would say that with a massacre such as this one, it is quite clear in my mind that the negotiations process is getting to a point where it is being seriously jeopardized by the actions of the South African government.
When Boipatong happened, we had reached the end of our tether. We got to a point where we felt that they were really not serious about negotiations. They were negotiating with us on the one side, and at the same time they were fueling violence through supporting their proxy to kill our people. And it was a collective decision by the National Executive that we should terminate negotiations. So the negotiations were terminated, and I announced that we are no longer going to talk to them. But Madiba, as president of the ANC, then directed me to phone Rolf Meyer. He said, SG, phone Rolf Meyer and open a channel of negotiation, of communication and negotiation. So that's how the channel was opened. No sooner had I announced that we're terminating, as directed, I called him and I said, when can we talk? And he said, what was that all about? I said to him, we were demonstrating to you that in the end, we don't have to engage in talks at all cost, because there's a level at which we can stop. And that terrified him and them, because if we hadn't made that call, we would have remained without talking for a long time. And many of our people, yes, would have taken to the streets, and the division between us and them, the NP side would have been bigger and bigger, and there could have been further turmoil and deaths in our country. And what we sought to avoid was the further instability and the chaos. Other people would argue that, out of chaos would have come up something out. But the leadership of the ANC felt that at the time we needed to take control. And in many ways, that was possibly one of the turning points, because terminating negotiations and then commencing the quiet talks put the negotiation trajectory on another level, which demonstrated to the other side that we were not going to them with a begging bowl in hand. We had the power to terminate and to opt for another way forward.
Some people, though, say that you were in a position of weakness. That's how they put it, and they say that CODESA may have brought democracy and relative peace, but it did not bring justice and substantive equality. Some say that they blame CODESA for the position that majority of South Africans who are black find themselves in right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is that view, I know. And I've often said to people, give me optionalities. What are the options? So that when we debate a matter, we know precisely what the options could have been. Of course, the whole process of negotiations yielded what we've got today. A constitution that is structured in the way that it is, which in large measure brought an end to apartheid, but which in some measures have not really dealt with the consequences of apartheid, which we're still living with, because the shadow of apartheid still casts itself on the current condition of our people and also into the future. We can see that. And as I said at the beginning, the process of erasing and undoing 340 years of damage, could it objectively be done in 30 years? Many would argue that, yes, that is going to be a difficult one. Because could you, in 30 years, for instance, a generation that was not well educated, be able to undo all that in just 30 years? Or will it take longer? And it could take longer. You could have done something maybe different. What could you have done? You could have said, well, when it comes, for instance, to dispossession of property, you could have said very well, the best way of doing it is to nationalize everything, smash the capitalist system, and introduce a new system. A number of countries have done that, and in many ways that took them back 40 to 50 years back. So could we have done that? Did we have the power and capability of doing that? We just didn't. We didn't have control of the army. We didn't have the control of the police who can do that, because if you're going to do that, you need those state resources to be able to do that.
Fast forward, if you're looking then at 30 years on, the ANC is now in power. Why have you not resolved the land question then?
Land question, I mean, I think we have mixed results when it comes to the land question. Land question had to be effected through our constitutional construct. And Section 25 of the Constitution sets out precisely how you would be able to resolve the land question. We started off by acquiring land in order to distribute to our people by purchasing. And we did that, and midway we realized that this is too expensive, because as soon as we appeared as government, the prices just went up. And that is when the slogan of we can no longer use a system that says that we are buyers and therefore we have to pay a higher price. In the end, the call for nationalizing or expropriation of land without compensation came forward. But in order to do that, you needed to have a constitutional precept that allows you to do that. So that's why there was a huge move then to amend the Constitution, which in the end did not succeed. Because right now, the Constitution on a straight line basis does not really allow you to do that. However, through the Expropriation Act that we've put into place now, you would be able to take land for public use. If, for instance, the desire is here at the union buildings or at somebody's farm, you needed to go and build a facility that would accommodate many people for public use, you'd be able to use that piece of legislation to expropriate without paying much compensation or nil compensation.
But some say that the ANC could have used its majority also in Parliament to agree to amend the Constitution and also empower an ordinary South African, for example, who says, I don't want it for public use, maybe I want it, let's say, for myself, to be able to then do small-scale farming,
yes,
partake in the economy, do whatever it is that I want to do with that land. And some felt failed by the ANC.
Yes. I think those who say so need to know and remember that as this argument was reaching its head, the discussions that ensued even in Parliament were such that the ANC did not have the majority. So it needed to work with others. And those that it could have worked with had a completely different idea of what needs to be done. Because those, for instance, felt that that expropriated land must then be owned completely by the state. And the ANC's view was the people of South Africa need to own the land. So that is where the disjuncture came in. So in the end, the ANC did not have the majority to be able to do that on its own.
So instead then of, what some call passing off the buck and shifting the goalpost on this issue, how do you begin to resolve it? Because one, we look for a proper audit that tells us who owns what.
Yes.
In this country. 30 years on, there's none of that. We still want to know. South Africans, a number of them, large percentage of them, about 80%, have no secure tenure. They're existing in informal land systems. They are looking for a finality on this matter. It's been 30 years and they want to know how and when does it get resolved.
When we got into government, we said we want to have by 2030 have ensured that 30% of the land is in the hands of black people. Right now, the studies that have been done by land or agri-economists say that we are at some 25%. So we are short up to 2030. Now, in the absence of what would have been the desirable option, we have put in place legislation, such as the one that I'm talking about, that will enable the ANC or ordinary people, or yes, the government to be able to identify a land where, for instance, there would be an ability for people to get land. For instance, you talk about land where people would be able to live. Quite a bit of that land is either in the hands of municipalities, in the hands of other state organs, and also in the hands of individuals. Now, the expropriation bill or act enables us to be able to expropriate that land with either small or measurable compensation or nil compensation, where we would be able to give people our land. And we must admit, and I must admit myself, that there has been a lack of much progress in this regard. I will admit that. we have moved rather slowly, and I was very pleased that I appointed a minister from another party that has always spoken about the land, and I've basically said to him, without putting his feet to the fire, I've said, you have always advocated for land, and now I'm giving you this responsibility. Speed up the process. And as it is now, he started speeding up the process, Minister Nyoncho. He's speeding up the process, looking at title deeds that our people should get. And we are now going to speed that up, speed it up exponentially. But where we have been weak, as you correctly say about an audit, where we've been weak is that a lot of land is owned by the government. And that's where we have been very weak. I will concede that. A number of government institutions own land, from local government, state institutions like ESCOM, Transnet, and you name them, and national government and provincial government. We own large tracts of land. And that is the land that we need to utilize to parcel out to our people. And that we can do without even really ruffling feathers. Although we do need to ruffle feathers when it comes to other portions of land, which legislation does allow us to do. And let me say, and speaking against what we should have done, even constitutional court judges have said that current Section 25 has never been fully tested by cases that have been brought to the court. So, yes, we need to do much more on land. And we are going to do much more because the hunger for land amongst our people is deep. For both housing as well as for farming and conducting other businesses. Wherever I go, I find that the emerging farmers always say, President, we are emerging farmers, we are beginning to do well, but we need more land. And so therefore, that is an area where we are going to begin to make progress in.
There's another area, though, that some say you need to make speedy progress on. You championed BEE, of course, it's the transformation that everybody was looking for to ensure that black people do participate fully in the economy. But if you still have 70% of CEOs in the JSE, they are white, they are men. One asks the question, when do you speed up that process to ensure that that particular picture changes?
That is another black blot on our transformation book, where we need to see greater progress. And hitherto, we have relied on, yes, the Employment Equity Act and urging and nudging companies to move in that direction. And there hasn't been as much progress as we want. There has been progress in other areas. It was unheard of to hear of female women occupying key positions, even in the private sector, as well as in the public sector. We now have a number that have come to the fore. And we need to have more. And the number of black female CEOs who are now leading companies that are listed on the JSE is rising, but we want to see it rise even more and more.
And they must be paid well too. And
they must be paid well, and we've taken a firm stance against unequal payment, that there must be equal payment. So on the BEE side, on empowering of women and empowering of black people as a whole, much more still needs to be done. So that is, as you correctly say, another area where we need to speed up so that the changes that are being thought of actually do happen. And I must say that we are continuously urged by organizations such as the Black Management Forum, the Black Business Council, and they play a key role in showing us the weaknesses and the lacunas in a number of these areas. So we have our job cut out, and it's a job that and objectives that we are not going to shake away from.
When you speak about empowerment, some people take you back to 1987.
Yeah.
You lead this huge strike
Yeah.
with NUM President,
Yeah.
Mr. Motlatsi at the time, and you decided to do that because wage negotiations were not going the way that you all believed as a union should have been going. And they say that when you look at the sector right now, that is the mining sector over time, it still has not transformed. It still needs to have more people paid well, mine workers paid well, and it's still a sector that some say needs to do more to transform. When you look at that moment and where we are now, and you still see mine workers complaining about pay that is fair, how does that make you feel?
Well, my own sense is a lot has been achieved in improving the lot of mine workers. The struggle that was waged from 1982, when I participated in the formation of the union, and today it's a completely different situation. Mine workers did not have a pension fund. They now have a pension fund. Mine workers could not resist going to work underground when it was dangerous. They now do. They have a whole number of other areas where they've progressed. And on pay, the pay has improved, but it will never have improved in a way where we can be proud, largely because of where mine workers work. They work in dangerous spaces, and therefore they need to be remunerated commensurate to the dangers that they're exposed to. So when it comes to mine workers are justified in continuing to advocate for much better working conditions, particularly when it comes to their wages. But on an overall basis, I will be one, together with James Motlatsi, to say that yes, the foundations that were put in place to improve the lives of mine workers have enabled the condition of mine workers to improve somewhat, much as there's much more that needs to be done.
We can't talk about the story of mining in South Africa without Marikana. I'm going to borrow from what Ray Hartley writes, and I'm keen to hear your thoughts. He says, and this is in the lead up to 2017, he's writing that years later, Ramaphosa still bore the scars from those cuts, that's from Marikana, and continued to suffer their ill effects. The criticism framed him as a capitalist insider who had thrown out his principles and now wore the cloak of the oppressor. He had once fought as the champion of mine workers. So deep were the wounds that in May 2017, when he began to campaign seriously for ANC presidency, Ramaphosa felt the need to offer a full apology to the victims of Marikana after being urged to do so by Winnie Madikizela Mandela and the NUM. You read this, some say you wore the cloak of the oppressor.
I participated in trying to stop further deaths from happening. 10 workers had been killed. And my intervention was to say, there is a disaster looming. More workers are being killed. and are going to be killed. My role was to try and stop further deaths from happening. Some of the workers had been hacked to death, and their eyes gouged out, their hearts ripped out. And that horrified me. And yes, I may well have used unfortunate language in the messages that I sent out, and for which I have apologized, and for which I do apologize. If sitting on a board of lawmen and being part of the whole process of BE, like many others in our country, we've encouraged them to be, is seen in that sense. I really shudder, because that can't be seen as wearing the cloak of an oppressor. It was sitting on a board of a company, and I could never be described as being part of the oppressor class, never, even by any imagination. And what one has been involved in, even now recently, even as initially as deputy president, and also as president, is to embark on a process that has led to the improvement of the livelihoods of workers in this country. I started my public career in the trade union movement, and that career was geared towards the improvement of the livelihoods of workers. And I was very proud to have carried that through even when I became deputy president. In fulfilling the objective and aspiration set out in the Freedom Charter, that we should have a minimum wage. So and a process which finally led to the adoption of a Minimum Wage Act, which I was involved in, together with others at NEDLEC, and there was a time when even COSATU leaders were afraid to stand up and articulate it for fear of being criticized, and I took the criticism, and of all sorts, when people were saying the minimum wage that we had finally arrived at was so low that, and some were even saying, even my dog, I don't have a dog, my children have dogs, even my dog can't be fed at the amount of money that we were saying could be the start of the minimum wage. That minimum wage process has advantaged more than 6 million workers, and it has been rising over time.
A mine worker who said, and I quote, "We are very pleased that you are here. I can now go and retire."
Yes.
Because what we fought for all these years and what you also came and fought for has now been attained.
Yeah.
And I can go and retire and die. You coming here shows that you have come home. You belong to us, the miners.
Yes.
Do you think this worker still feels the same if he's still alive?
He has retired. I know him. He's retired to Lesotho.
Does it still feel the same way? That when it comes to the mine workers' struggle in the country, you're still one of them?
Yes, I would think so, because of the continuation of what I have advocated for throughout, culminating with where I am now as president, but which reached a level of real sort of speeding up when we negotiated the national minimum wage. We now have a national minimum wage, which is going to keep rising, to lift all workers in our country who should never be paid below a certain amount of money. That is a phenomenal achievement, which was envisaged by the Freedom Charter. And if one were to look at the Freedom Charter aspirations, that will be written as one of those that has been achieved. And I'm rather proud of that, because it didn't come easy. And in my case, it also came with a great deal of criticism, some of it very personal. And I weathered that even when, union leaders were afraid to step there because they did not want the criticism. When we struck it, I said, this minimum wage is going to keep rising. Everything has to start somewhere, and it will rise as time goes on. And today, that minimum wage is supporting the earning capacity of easily more than 6 million workers in our country. In fact, you could say all of them, because none of the 16 million workers who work in South Africa should ever be paid below that minimum wage.
But then you have illegal mining.
Yes. We have illegal mining now, which is a huge problem, because you've had a phenomenon where the operating mines have run out of ore, and those holes they dug into the ground were not closed. So there are gaping holes. Some are still having shafts that enable those who are now, say, for instance, unemployed, who know where the remaining ore body is, who go underground in very unsafe circumstances. Because when the mines were operating, they were operating under the aegis of big companies, big corporates that had the financial resource to be able to pump air inside, chill the air, have safety measures, and everything that was set out in the regulations. Now they have gone. And the regulations are not observed. And people have now gone into those crevices to go and mine very dangerously. And in the end, to address this matter, we've got to go to the kingpins, because these workers dig up the ore, and in the end, they're incentivized by people who are either sitting in Switzerland, in Sandton, and places like that, who then buy that ore on the cheap. And so they are the ones who are fueling that. We are not unique as a country in handling this. Many other countries on the continent have a problem of what they call artisanal miners. In other countries, they've handled it better than we do. In some cases, because it's more, if you like, surface mining. With surface mining, the dangers to life and death, and health rather, becomes easier. With us, it's underground. And that is why we are now dealing with the Stilfontein situation. It is exacerbated when criminal syndicates and elements then get involved, and they get people to go underground with guns, and they are fully armed. And then it becomes a problem when they start competing amongst themselves, where you've got syndicates fighting for turf and killing each other, and be prepared to defend their territory even against the authorities.
It also speaks to the desperation, though, in poverty levels in the country, that people are finding themselves having to risk their lives at this level because they're hungry.
Yes. Unemployment is the key problem that we are confronting. We've got a problem of an economy that is not growing at the levels where it can generate more and more jobs. And that's precisely the problem that we are seized with. In the Government of National Unity, what brought us together to want to work together, apart from being put in this situation by the voters, is precisely to address unemployment and to grow the economy. And in doing so, we are very much alive to the fact that we've got to introduce reforms. We've got to repair what is broken, to enable the economy to start growing. We've got to ensure that load shedding does not happen going into the future. We've got to make sure that our ports work well for exports. We've got to make sure that our rail network works so that the trucks do not continue damaging our roads. We've got to make sure that local government works, because that is where the economy really functions and where it grows. So those are the many problems that we've got to address in order to address the problem of unemployment.
As a final question, then a parting shot, back to redress. Nelson Mandela had a vision of national cohesion, a rainbow nation. Where are we?
When you have an economy that's not really growing as well as you want to, it also challenges the issues of national cohesion. As soon as people have a sense that, yes, the strategy that the government has put in place to grow the economy is working, then it has other dividends. The other dividends is to improve national cohesion. Of course, there are many other processes that we can rely on. For instance, sports unites us. Sense of nationhood unites all of us. But we need much more. And we need to have people having a sense that, yes, there's a future with this country. Now, the coming in of the government of national unity has infused that hope in the hearts of many people. Many people have become hopeful that, yes, we can now look to a South Africa that can change for the better, grow, and we need to exploit that, and we want to exploit that. Next year, we are going to be leading the G20, and I would like a broad section of South Africa's people to have a sense that this is their G20, and it will yield not only a declaration that will be crafted in the end, but it will also yield to investments that will come into our country to grow our economy. Next year, we also want to have a national dialogue which I'm hoping will bring as many South African organizations as possible so that we can talk about the South Africa we want and how we deal with the current challenges that we have, and to examine the challenges that the government is addressing now and to see whether they are adequate or not. We've got a lot of wise minds in South Africa. I want to mobilize them to come to deal with the challenges we have.
All right. You owe us part 2 of this conversation.
Yes.
A lot still needs to be talked about. 30 years is a long time.
Yes.
There's a lot that we still need to talk about. So hopefully we speak again and we reflect on the more, because there is still more. But so far, thank you so much.
Bongiwe sounds like a threat. But I will take your threat on.
All I'm saying is, let's try to clear the diary for part 2.
Okay.
And I'm hoping it can happen.
It will happen.
Thank you.
Thank
it's
you
not
very
a threat. Thank you so much. Thank you for chatting to us. And certainly, there's a lot still that South Africa still needs to traverse as part of a journey, and it doesn't end here. So thank you so much, Mr. President.
Thank you.